But worse than the physical symptoms was watching my savings account drain despite having good insurance. The copays alone were crushing me. Even with coverage, I was responsible for 20% of each medication cost, plus the monthly deductibles, plus all the additional supplements and supportive care medications that insurance deemed unnecessary. I'd started selling things to cover the medical expenses. First, it was jewelry I never wore anyway. Then furniture I didn't absolutely need. My car went next, which meant relying on Lisa for transportation to all my appointments. She never complained about driving me to the cancer center twice a week or to the pharmacy for my pickups. If anything, she seemed eager to help, always volunteering to handle errands when I was feeling particularly rough. The treatment schedule was grueling but predictable. Mondays and Thursdays were infusion days at the cancer center, where I'd spend 4 hours hooked up to IV drips while reading or trying to sleep in the reclining chairs. Tuesdays, I'd pick up my oral medications from the pharmacy, a collection of pills and capsules that had to be taken at specific times throughout the week. The routine became second nature after a few months, though the medications never got easier to tolerate. Dr. Hernandez had been optimistic about my response to treatment from the beginning. The particular type of lymphoma I had was known to respond well to this specific drug combination, though she warned me that everyone reacted differently. After 3 months of treatment, my first progress scan showed significant improvement. The tumors had shrunk by 60%, which was exactly what we'd hoped to see. She scheduled my next scan for month 6, explaining that if we saw continued improvement, we might be able to start tapering some of the medications. Lisa celebrated that first good scan result more enthusiastically than I did. She'd been tracking my progress obsessively, asking detailed questions about every aspect of my treatment, taking notes during doctor appointments, and researching everything online. I appreciated her involvement, though sometimes it felt overwhelming. She'd quiz me about whether I'd taken each medication at the right time, whether I was experiencing any new side effects, and whether the pharmacy had given me the correct pills. Her attention to detail seemed excessive, but I chalked it up to worry and her medical background. The financial strain continued to worsen, despite the positive medical news. My disability payments from work covered basic living expenses, but the medical costs were relentless. Insurance would approve certain medications but reject others, leading to constant appeals and prior authorization battles. Sometimes I'd arrive at the pharmacy only to discover that a crucial medication had been denied, requiring Dr. Hernandez's office to submit additional paperwork and wait for approval. These delays were terrifying when you knew that missing even a few days of treatment could allow the cancer to gain ground again. By month 4, I'd exhausted most of my savings and was considering taking out loans to continue treatment. Lisa suggested I apply for financial assistance through the pharmaceutical companies that manufactured my medications. Many drug companies had programs for patients who couldn't afford their medications, she explained, and given my situation, I'd likely qualify. The application process was complex, requiring detailed financial documentation and letters from my physician, but Lisa offered to help with all the paperwork. The assistance programs were a lifeline. Within 6 weeks, I was approved for significant discounts on 3 of my most expensive medications. The monthly pharmacy bills dropped from nearly $8,000 in copays to less than $2,000. It wasn't pocket change, but it meant I could continue treatment without going into bankruptcy. Lisa seemed as relieved as I was when the approval letters arrived, and she immediately volunteered to handle all the coordination with the pharmacy to make sure the discounts were properly applied. As we approached my 6-month scan, I was feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time since my diagnosis. The side effects were manageable, my energy levels had improved slightly, and the financial pressure had eased enough that I could focus on healing instead of constantly worrying about money. Dr. Hernandez had hinted that if this scan showed continued improvement, we might be able to discuss reducing the frequency of some treatments, which would mean fewer trips to the cancer center and potentially lower costs overall. Lisa had become increasingly involved in managing my care as my treatment progressed. She'd taken over most of the communication with the pharmacy, claiming it was easier for her to call during business hours while I was resting. She kept meticulous records of all my medications, their schedules, and their effects. Sometimes I'd find her researching drug interactions online late at night, or calling the doctor's office with questions about dosage adjustments. Her dedication was impressive, though part of me wondered if she was becoming too invested in the medical details. The night before my 6-month scan, Lisa made my favorite dinner, and we talked about what we'd do to celebrate if the results were good. She'd already researched restaurants that accommodated my dietary restrictions, and she'd found a spa that specialized in treatments for cancer patients. It felt premature to plan celebrations before getting the results, but her optimism was infectious. For the first time in months, I fell asleep thinking about a future beyond treatment schedules and medication side effects. The 6-month scan results were devastating, but not in the way I'd expected. Dr. Hernandez stared at her computer screen with a confusion I'd never seen before, pulling up previous scans and comparing them side by side. The tumors hadn't just stopped shrinking, they'd grown aggressively. In some areas, the cancer had spread to new lymph nodes that had been cleared just 3 months earlier. "I don't understand," she said, scrolling through my treatment records. "Your medication compliance has been excellent according to your reports. You've been taking everything exactly as prescribed?" "Of course," I replied, though doubt crept into my voice. Lisa had been managing most of my medication schedule lately, organizing the pills and reminding me when to take what. Dr. Hernandez ordered blood work to check the levels of active compounds in my system, something she'd never done before. The results came back 2 days later. The therapeutic levels of my primary medications were barely detectable. Some weren't present at all. Dr. Hernandez called me personally, which never happened unless something was seriously wrong. "We need to talk immediately," she said. "Can you come in this afternoon?" I called Lisa to ask for a ride, but she said she was stuck at work. I ended up taking an expensive rideshare to the cancer center, arriving 30 minutes early and spending the time in the parking lot trying not to panic. Dr. Hernandez didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your blood work shows that you haven't been receiving your medications, or at least not the full doses. The levels are consistent with someone who's been taking maybe 20% of their prescribed regimen." "That's impossible," I told her. "I've been taking everything exactly as scheduled." "Have you been picking up your prescriptions yourself?" she asked. "Not recently," I admitted. "My sister has been handling the pharmacy runs because I've been too tired. She recommended I go directly to the pharmacy to verify my prescription history." Janet, the pharmacist, pulled up my account and frowned at her screen. "This is odd," she said. "According to our records, you've been picking up partial quantities of several medications over the past 2 months. Instead of your full monthly supply, you've been getting week-long portions. Your sister said you were having storage issues and preferred smaller quantities to prevent waste." My stomach dropped. I never asked for smaller quantities. Janet's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Let me check something," she said, disappearing into the back room. She returned with printouts and a worried look. "Someone's been calling to modify your orders, claiming to be calling on your behalf. They said you were experiencing severe side effects and wanted to reduce doses. We thought the calls were coming from Dr. Hernandez's office, but now I'm wondering if we should have verified directly with your doctor." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through the implications. When I confronted Lisa that evening, she initially tried to play innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Maybe the pharmacy made mistakes." But when I showed her the prescription records and blood test results, her story began falling apart. She claimed she'd been trying to help me by reducing the doses because I seemed to be suffering too much from side effects. That might have been believable if I hadn't found the evidence in her bedroom the next morning while she was at work. I'd gone looking for a phone charger and discovered a shoebox filled with my medication bottles. Not empty bottles, full ones. Dozens of them, some with labels partially torn off, others with dates going back months. Each bottle contained pills worth hundreds or thousands of dollars on the black market. My hands shook as I counted the bottles. There were at least 50 containers of various medications, representing tens of thousands of dollars in treatment. Some were pills I recognized from my own regimen, others were medications I'd never seen before. Several bottles had different patient names on them, suggesting Lisa had somehow been collecting medications from multiple sources. I called Dr. Hernandez immediately. She listened to my description of what I'd found and instructed me not to touch anything else. "This is a federal crime," she said. "These medications are controlled substances, and diverting them is something the DEA takes very seriously. She gave me the number for a special agent who handled pharmaceutical crimes and told me to call immediately. Agent Rodriguez arrived at the house within 2 hours, accompanied by 2 other federal agents and a forensics team. They photographed everything in Lisa's room, carefully cataloging each medication bottle and documenting the evidence. Agent Rodriguez explained that they'd been investigating a network of people stealing and reselling cancer medications across the Southwest. Several patients had reported similar situations where family members or caregivers had been tampering with their treatment. The scope of Lisa's operation became clear as the agents worked. She hadn't just been stealing my medications, she'd been systematically collecting drugs from other patients at the clinic where she worked. Her position as a medical assistant gave her access to prescription information and patient schedules. She'd been calling pharmacies, claiming to represent various doctors' offices, modifying orders to create surplus medications that she could then sell online. Agent Rodriguez showed me printouts of Lisa's communications with buyers on encrypted messaging apps. The messages were cold and businesslike, negotiating prices for specific medications and discussing delivery methods. One conversation particularly stood out, where a buyer asked if the drugs were genuine, and Lisa responded that they came directly from cancer patients who wouldn't miss small quantities. She'd been selling my life-saving medications while watching me suffer from the cancer's progression. The financial records they uncovered were staggering. Lisa had made over $60,000 in the past 4 months selling medications. She'd been systematic about it, taking just enough from each prescription to avoid immediate detection while maximizing her profits. The medications she stole from me alone were worth nearly $20,000, explaining why my insurance company had been covering what they thought were my full prescriptions, while I was actually receiving fractions of the intended doses. When Lisa came home that evening, federal agents were waiting for her. She tried to run when she saw the law enforcement vehicles in the driveway, but Agent Rodriguez caught her before she reached the street. As they handcuffed her, she screamed at me about betraying family and ruining her life. "You were dying anyway," she yelled as they put her in the car. "I was just trying to pay off my debts before you didn't need the pills anymore." The medical team had to restart my treatment protocol from the beginning. Dr. Hernandez explained that the inconsistent medication levels had allowed the cancer to develop resistance to some of the drugs, meaning we'd have to try different, more aggressive treatments. "The lost time could have been fatal," she said. "If we'd waited another month to discover this, the cancer might have progressed beyond what we could treat effectively." Agent Rodriguez kept me updated on the investigation's progress. Lisa's case was part of a larger federal operation targeting medication theft rings across multiple states. Her clinic was shut down pending investigation, and several other employees were arrested on related charges. The DEA had been tracking this network for over a year, and Lisa's arrest provided the breakthrough they needed to uncover the entire operation. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix felt imposing as I walked through the metal detectors 3 months later. Agent Rodriguez had warned me that Lisa's sentencing hearing would be emotional, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing my sister in an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled as she sat at the defendant's table. She looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way I'd never seen before. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez, had built an airtight case. Lisa had pled guilty to multiple federal charges, including conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, healthcare fraud, and wire fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Beyond the medications found in her possession, investigators had traced her online sales through cryptocurrency transactions and encrypted communications. She'd been operating her theft ring for over 8 months, victimizing dozens of cancer patients across Arizona and New Mexico. Judge Williams listened impassively as Martinez presented the scope of Lisa's crimes. The financial damage exceeded $300,000 in stolen medications, but the human cost was incalculable. 4 patients had experienced treatment setbacks similar to mine. One elderly man with prostate cancer had died while his medications were being diverted, though the prosecution couldn't definitively link his death to the theft. The judge's expression hardened as she heard these details. When it came time for victim impact statements, I wasn't the only one who spoke. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria Gonzalez, a breast cancer survivor whose medications Lisa had stolen through the clinic, described how her treatment delays had required additional surgery. Robert Chen spoke about watching his wife suffer through unnecessary pain because her medications had been systematically reduced without her knowledge. Each story painted a picture of Lisa as someone who had callously profited from human suffering. My own statement was harder to deliver than I'd expected. Standing at the podium, looking directly at Lisa, I spoke about the trust that had been violated. She wasn't just my sister, she was my caregiver, the person I'd depended on during the most vulnerable period of my life. The betrayal went beyond theft, I told the judge. It was attempted murder disguised as family support. Lisa never looked up during my statement, staring at her hands as I described watching my cancer progress while she counted her profits. The defense attorney tried to paint Lisa as someone who'd made desperate choices due to financial pressure. She'd accumulated gambling debts, he explained, and had rationalized the theft as temporarily borrowing medications that insurance would replace. The argument fell flat when Agent Rodriguez testified about Lisa's methodical approach and her cold communications with buyers. This wasn't desperation, he said. This was calculated exploitation of vulnerable people. Judge Williams sentenced Lisa to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She would also have to pay full restitution to all victims and forfeit all assets purchased with proceeds from the scheme. The judge's words were pointed as she delivered the sentence. "You systematically betrayed people fighting for their lives," she said. "You turned their medicine into your profit while they suffered and wondered why their treatments weren't working." The DEA's investigation had broader implications beyond Lisa's case. Agent Rodriguez explained that the network she'd been part of was international, with medications being sold to buyers in multiple countries where cancer treatments were prohibitively expensive. The encryption methods they'd used were sophisticated, and breaking into their communications had led to arrests in 6 other states. Lisa's cooperation with the investigation had been minimal, but the evidence recovered from her activities helped authorities understand the full scope of the operation. Dr. Hernandez had managed to get my treatment back on track, though it required starting over with a completely different protocol. The new medications were more aggressive and carried additional side effects, but they were working. My latest scans showed significant improvement, with tumors shrinking faster than they had during my original treatment. She explained that sometimes treatment setbacks, while dangerous, could actually provide valuable information about which therapies were most effective. The financial recovery took longer than the medical recovery. The restitution ordered by the court would take years to collect, if it ever came at all. Lisa had spent most of her profits paying gambling debts and had few remaining assets. However, Agent Rodriguez connected me with a federal victim assistance program that helped cover some of my treatment costs during the period when I'd been receiving inadequate medication. The program also provided counseling services for victims of healthcare fraud. The cancer center staff rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Janet at the pharmacy implemented new security protocols after learning about Lisa's deception, including direct verification calls to patients for any prescription modifications. Dr. Hernandez's office established a patient advocate position specifically to help people navigate complex medication management and identify potential signs of diversion or fraud. Other patients in the cancer center began sharing their own stories of family members who'd attempted to exploit their illnesses financially. Support groups formed organically, with people comparing experiences and warning signs. One group started a formal program to help patients identify trusted advocates and establish safeguards against caregiver abuse. The program expanded to other cancer centers across the region. Agent Rodriguez stayed in touch throughout my recovery, providing updates on the broader investigation and checking on my well-being. He explained that cases like mine were becoming more common as medication costs increased and black market demand grew. The DEA had established specialized units to focus on pharmaceutical theft, particularly crimes targeting cancer patients and other vulnerable populations. My relationship with my extended family shifted dramatically after Lisa's arrest. Some relatives blamed me for cooperating with federal authorities, arguing that family problems should be handled privately. Others were supportive, but struggled to understand how Lisa had been capable of such calculated cruelty. I found myself explaining repeatedly, That reporting the theft wasn't about revenge, it was about preventing her from victimizing other patients. The most unexpected support came from complete strangers. Other cancer patients reached out through social media and support forums after news of Lisa's case became public. Many shared similar experiences of family members or caregivers who'd exploited their illnesses financially. Some had never reported these crimes, feeling too ashamed or guilty to involve law enforcement. Hearing about my case gave them courage to seek help. A year later, I was declared cancer-free. The aggressive treatment protocol that Dr. Hernandez had designed after discovering Lisa's theft had been remarkably effective. Agent Rodriguez attended my final treatment celebration, bringing news that the investigation Lisa's case had triggered had led to the dismantling of medication theft networks across the Southwest. Dozens of arrests had been made, and new federal guidelines had been established to prevent similar crimes. Looking back, I realized that Lisa's betrayal had inadvertently led to positive changes that would protect future patients. The security protocols implemented at pharmacies, the patient advocacy programs at cancer centers, and the increased federal attention to medication theft would prevent others from experiencing what I'd gone through. Sometimes justice comes not just from punishment, but from the systematic changes that prevent similar crimes. The trust I'd lost in family members was replaced by faith in institutions and strangers who'd stepped up during my crisis. The DEA agents, prosecutors, medical staff, and fellow patients had formed a different kind of family, one based on shared commitment to protecting vulnerable people rather than blood relations. That realization was perhaps the most valuable part of my recovery. 2 years after my final treatment, I received an unexpected phone call that would change everything I thought I knew about Lisa's crimes. Agent Rodriguez was on the line, his voice carrying a familiar urgency that immediately transported me back to those terrifying early days of the investigation. "We need to meet," he said. "There's been a development in your sister's case that you need to hear about in person." We met at a coffee shop near the federal building, the same place where we'd discussed the initial charges against Lisa. Agent Rodriguez looked older, more worn down by the weight of cases like mine. He'd been promoted since Lisa's sentencing, now heading up the pharmaceutical crimes unit for the entire Southwest region. The success of Lisa's case had made him something of an expert in medication theft investigations. What he told me that afternoon reframed everything I thought I understood about my sister's motivations. The DEA had been monitoring communications from the federal prison where Lisa was serving her sentence. Inmates' phone calls and correspondence were routinely screened, and something in Lisa's conversations had caught the attention of investigators. She'd been providing information about other medication theft operations, cooperating with ongoing investigations in ways that went far beyond her original plea agreement. Agent Rodriguez explained that Lisa had initially refused to cooperate during her sentencing, maintaining that she'd acted alone and knew nothing about larger networks. But 6 months into her prison term, she'd reached out through her attorney, claiming she had information about other medical professionals involved in similar schemes. The intelligence she provided had led to arrests in 3 additional states and uncovered a sophisticated operation involving dozens of healthcare workers. The revelation that troubled me most was Lisa's claim about why she'd targeted me specifically. In her communications with investigators, she'd admitted that stealing my medications had been a test case for the larger network. My high-value prescriptions and isolated living situation had made me an ideal victim to practice on before expanding to other patients. The cruelty was even more calculated than anyone had realized. But there was something else, something that Agent Rodriguez had hesitated to share. Lisa had also revealed details about other family members she'd considered targeting. Our cousin Michael, who'd been receiving treatment for multiple sclerosis, had been on her list of potential victims. Our elderly Aunt Dorothy, who relied on expensive cardiac medications, had also been researched as a possible target. Lisa had been building profiles of vulnerable relatives across our extended family. The scope of her planning was staggering. She'd maintained detailed records of family members' medical conditions, insurance coverage, and social situations. She'd identified which relatives lived alone, which ones had complicated medication regimens, and which ones would be least likely to notice if their treatment was being compromised. I wasn't just her sister who'd gotten sick at an inconvenient time, I was her first successful victim in what was planned to be a much larger operation. Agent Rodriguez handed me copies of Lisa's prison correspondence, redacted but still revealing enough to show her mindset. In letters to other inmates, she'd written about the pharmaceutical theft business as if it were a legitimate career path. She'd provided advice to other prisoners about identifying vulnerable patients and establishing relationships with corrupt pharmacy employees. Even from prison, she was trying to expand the criminal network that had nearly killed me. The federal prosecutor's office was offering Lisa a reduced sentence in exchange for her continued cooperation, but they wanted my input as her primary victim. The information she was providing had prevented similar crimes against other cancer patients and had led to the arrest of healthcare workers who might have continued stealing medications for years. Her cooperation was genuinely valuable, but accepting it meant acknowledging that her crimes against me had been even more premeditated than originally understood. I struggled with the decision for weeks. Part of me wanted Lisa to serve every day of her original sentence, especially knowing how deliberately she'd chosen me as a victim. But Agent Rodriguez had shown me case files of other patients whose medications were being stolen by the networks Lisa was helping to dismantle. Elderly patients with Parkinson's disease were being targeted by home health aides. Children with rare genetic conditions were having their medications diverted by school nurses. The scope of pharmaceutical theft was enormous and growing. Dr. Hernandez helped me think through the ethical implications when I asked for her advice. She'd seen other patients become victims of medication theft in the years since my case, and she understood the broader public health impact. Your sister's information could prevent other families from going through what you experienced, she said. Sometimes the greater good requires accepting imperfect justice. The meeting with the prosecutor was surreal. Lisa participated via video conference from the federal prison, looking healthier than she had during her sentencing. She'd been working in the prison's medical unit, using her healthcare background to assist with inmate care. Her attorney explained that she'd been a model prisoner, attending counseling programs and educational classes. She seemed like a completely different person from the woman who'd stolen my medications while I fought for my life. When given the opportunity to address me directly, Lisa's apology was more comprehensive than anything she'd offered during her trial. She acknowledged the calculation behind her crimes and expressed understanding of how close she'd come to causing my death. She also revealed something new, that she'd been struggling with gambling addiction for years before my diagnosis, accumulating debts that had driven her to increasingly desperate measures. The gambling addiction didn't excuse her actions, but it provided context that had been missing from the original investigation. Lisa had been stealing small amounts of money and medications from her workplace for months before my cancer diagnosis. My illness had simply provided her with a more lucrative opportunity to expand her criminal activities. She'd seen my suffering as a business opportunity rather than a family crisis. Her cooperation agreement was approved, reducing her sentence by 2 years in exchange for continued assistance with ongoing investigations. She would still serve a substantial prison term, but her information would help protect other vulnerable patients from similar exploitation. Agent Rodriguez assured me that her cooperation would be closely monitored and that any attempt to mislead investigators would result in the restoration of her full sentence. The decision to support Lisa's cooperation agreement felt like betraying my own sense of justice, but the prosecutor's office provided statistics that helped put it in perspective. The networks that Lisa's information had helped dismantle had been stealing medications worth millions of dollars annually. Hundreds of patients had been affected, many without ever realizing their treatments were being compromised. Some had died during periods when their medications were being diverted. Understanding the broader scope of pharmaceutical theft changed how I viewed my own experience. I wasn't just a victim of my sister's greed. I was part of a much larger pattern of vulnerable people being exploited by those they trusted most. Healthcare workers, family members, and caregivers were systematically stealing medications from the people who needed them most, creating a hidden epidemic of treatment failures and unnecessary deaths. 3 years have passed since that devastating discovery in Lisa's bedroom, and my life has found a rhythm I never expected to experience again. The cancer remains in remission, with clear scans every 6 months serving as reminders of just how close I came to losing everything. Dr. Hernandez still marvels at my recovery, often using my case as an example for other patients about the importance of medication compliance and the dangers of treatment interruption. The pharmacy where I now pick up my maintenance medications has implemented security measures that didn't exist during Lisa's theft. Every prescription modification requires direct patient verification through multiple channels. Janet retired last year, but not before training her replacement on the warning signs of medication diversion. The entire healthcare system has become more vigilant, with federal guidelines now requiring specific protocols for handling high-value medications and monitoring patient compliance. My involvement in Lisa's cooperation agreement led to an unexpected career change. Agent Rodriguez invited me to speak at DEA training seminars about recognizing and investigating pharmaceutical theft. Healthcare professionals, law enforcement officers, and social workers attend these sessions to learn about the psychological and practical aspects of medication diversion. Sharing my story with these audiences has become a form of therapy, transforming my trauma into a tool for protecting others. The victim advocacy program that emerged from my case has expanded nationwide. Cancer centers across the country now employ patient advocates specifically trained to identify signs of caregiver abuse and medication theft. These advocates provide resources for patients who lack trustworthy support systems and offer guidance on protecting themselves from exploitation during vulnerable periods. The program has prevented countless cases of medication diversion and has created a network of support for isolated patients. Lisa was released from federal prison 8 months ago after serving nearly 6 years of her reduced sentence. She reached out through her attorney, requesting a meeting that I initially refused. Her parole officer eventually convinced me that seeing her might provide closure for both of us. We met in a supervised setting, with her counselor present to facilitate the conversation. The woman I spoke with bore little resemblance to the sister who had stolen my medications. Prison had changed Lisa in ways I hadn't anticipated. She'd completed a bachelor's degree in addiction counseling and had been working with other inmates struggling with gambling addiction. Her understanding of how addiction had distorted her thinking was genuine, though it didn't diminish the calculated nature of her crimes against me. She'd spent years in therapy processing the fact that she'd been willing to let me die to pay her debts. The conversation was difficult but necessary. Lisa acknowledged that her addiction hadn't excused her behavior, merely explained the desperation that had led to increasingly harmful choices. She'd known exactly what she was doing when she reduced my medications, understanding that the delayed treatment could be fatal. The remorse she expressed seemed authentic, backed by years of reflection and counseling rather than the hollow apologies she'd offered during her trial. We don't have a relationship now, and probably never will. The trust that was broken goes beyond simple forgiveness, touching something fundamental about safety and family bonds. But seeing her take responsibility without excuses provided a sense of resolution I hadn't expected. She's required to attend continued counseling as part of her parole and has been barred from any employment involving access to medications or vulnerable populations. The financial restitution ordered by the court has been partially paid through Lisa's prison wages and the sale of her remaining assets. The amount will never fully compensate for the additional medical expenses and emotional trauma, but the symbolic acknowledgement matters. More importantly, the enhanced security measures implemented as a result of the investigation have protected countless other patients from similar exploitation. My extended family relationships remain complicated. Some relatives still believe I was too harsh in cooperating with federal authorities, arguing that family loyalty should have taken precedence over legal consequences. Others have supported my decisions and have implemented their own safeguards to protect vulnerable family members from potential exploitation. The experience revealed character traits in people that I hadn't recognized before. The cancer support groups I now facilitate include discussions about protecting yourself from caregiver abuse and medication theft. Many participants share stories of family members or healthcare workers who've exploited their illnesses financially. These conversations have led to the development of practical strategies for patients to maintain control over their medical care and medications, even when they need assistance managing complex treatment regimens. Looking back, I realized that Lisa's betrayal, while devastating, ultimately led to systematic changes that have protected thousands of other patients. The enhanced security protocols, the victim advocacy programs, and the increased federal attention to pharmaceutical theft all emerged from the investigation of my case. Sometimes the most painful experiences create the greatest opportunities for positive change. My health continues to improve, with energy levels that now exceed what I had before my cancer diagnosis. The aggressive treatment protocol that Dr. Hernandez designed after discovering the medication theft proved remarkably effective, eliminating the cancer completely and providing a foundation for long-term health. The irony isn't lost on me that Lisa's crimes, intended to profit from my suffering, ultimately led to better treatment and complete recovery. The story doesn't end with forgiveness or reconciliation, because some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. Instead, it ends with the knowledge that justice was served, that systematic changes emerged from tragedy, and that the people who stepped up during my crisis proved that family isn't always about blood relations. Sometimes the most important family members are the ones who choose to protect and support you when you're most vulnerable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.